Let's talk serverless. It is a great convenience to not have to worry about setting up clusters, but what is the catch to your customers since you are abstracting away the compute management?
Yeah, serverless is a product that is very similar to technological innovation that automates things, where there's always kind of concerns about giving up control. We're at a period where self-driving cars are kind of in their adoption curve, and we're like a year or two away from them being fully autonomous, and we've been a year or two away for like the past 2 decades. There's always concerns about things about, hey, you took away that steering wheel. I liked that steering wheel. There's a couple of things I think about with serverless. One is when it comes to pure cost, I think it's really important to make sure you're thinking about the total cost. And I'm trying to make people shift their mindset to that. Total cost, first of all, there's the DBU cost, and then there's the infrastructure cost of the VMs, and then there's whatever storage and things that go with that. And then there's the labor cost of it. And I think most people understand that easier is better. But maybe what some people have a harder time with is understanding at a certain scale, you can equate easier with cost savings for the company. Across a portfolio, if before it cost you X amount to run those workloads and you had a team of 5 people doing it, and then in this other state, because you don't have to do the knobs and it's automated, that team of 5 people can do 5 times as much work. It really smoothed out their salaries across that 5 times much work, and therefore sort of lowered the cost per bit of data insight, if that's the metric you would use. And I think that's important to think about, because I'll see a lot of people look at serverless and be like, I ran a job that I've been tuning for 4 years, and then I ran it on serverless and it was 8% more expensive. Like, okay, yeah, but like that actually still might be cheaper, because what's your hourly rate for those 4 years you were tuning that job? There's a bit of an adoption in finding the sweet spot. There are going to be some things where very quickly it makes a lot of sense to move over to serverless, a brand new thing that's interactive, that you just want to work and you don't want to have to think about the underlying infra, or a company that doesn't have that expertise internally. There's other cases where you've already invested in that knowledge and you understand how Spark works and which instances are good for it. And you say, hey, I want some more of those knobs. And maybe right now, because you know how to use those knobs, it is okay to have those knobs, but eventually you might not want them. And I'll go back to that car analogy. Some people love driving a manual transmission and shifting the gears and having the full control. Some people like automatic. They're like, you know what? I never learned to do that. I don't want to have to learn to do it. And I get that maybe automatic isn't quite as efficient for racing Formula One, but I'm just driving to go get groceries. And now you really have the full next step, which is like, I don't even want a steering wheel. I just want like the autonomous car to take me where. And I think you give up control along the way. That lowers some of the costs, even if, yeah, maybe on day one, the automatic transmission car cost a little bit more to install, or autonomous cars cost a little bit more to set up right now. I think over time, you see them be more efficient, and that's how progress happens. So I suspect we're in that point of the curve now where we're all kind of finding together, well, what type of things work best on serverless? What's important to me is that everyone understands it's not going to be everything day one. Some companies are going to be in a better place than another to adopt. And I've even heard some customers say, actually, for jobs, all my jobs are code reviewed and finely tuned, and they're pretty stable. And maybe that doesn't need to go on serverless day one, but interactive, where you have a bunch of users and things that are really spiky and they don't want to have to wait for the Spark setup, startup of the VMs, et cetera. That might be the day one, whereas the jobs might be a day N, when some additional improvements come that sort of make that work really well.
And that goes in line with my current recommendation that I did in one of my fairly recent posts, where I said, hey, if you're doing interactive work, it's almost a no-brainer to just use serverless. So there's no point in waiting, because at least in my experience is you start the cluster, you walk away to get coffee, you come back, and guess what? That thing already auto-terminated if you had it at 10 minutes. Or if you had it higher, then you're paying for that idle time. So definitely something I agree with, the value of interactive serverless compute. Now, I will say though, just to kind of clarify, is would a fair statement be to say, yes, you can potentially fine tune, and many people can fine tune their compute to potentially be more efficient than serverless on some jobs. However, not many people have that level of knowledge, as well as the labor that even for those that have that knowledge, the time it takes to do that might not be worth the ROI, or might not have the ROI that you are desiring.
Yeah. I think if I were to like hide my Databricks logo for a second and just put on my Greg, who's worked in software for a long time hat, I'd say to me, interactive seems like the obvious one. Like, hey, the spin up time and ramp down and the way those workloads go, serverless seems like a day one win. Jobs tend to be a little different because of the workload deployment and stuff. But what I suspect is over time that'll shift as the data intelligence that tunes serverless gets better and better. And then as you have more and more workloads that you haven't put that time into tuning, that thing will flip eventually where the ROI on doing it won't be there. But yeah, I think a lot of people are comparing the wrong thing today. They're taking this highly optimized job they've already invested the tuning into. I'm like, hey, listen, if you've already done it, and you're sort of on the V1 of our automation algorithm, yeah, it might not beat you today, but like, are you really going to bet on the side of our AI not getting better in the future as it has more workloads and more tuning, and as we change, things all the way down into the Spark level to work even better with it? We continue to be a major contributor to the Spark project, and I think we're gonna only learn and do things that'll make that better over time. So for jobs, I think there is a question of when, and I see a lot of people that they have a new thing, now is the time. And I think over time, more and more things will tip that point where you're like, hey, that's a no-brainer as well.
Honestly, that goes pretty in line, especially the last bit with what was my recommendation, which is for any new job, just go ahead and put it in serverless. It's probably going to be a better option for you than trying to figure out and running tests. And it's like, oh no, this was undersized or this was oversized. So,
what's funny is the Databricks billing team, we actually run on top of Databricks. Not a lot of people know this, but we're one of the biggest Databricks use cases. We're deployed in every single Databricks region because we do regional billing pipelines where we measure. So I'm not aware of anyone that is as widely deployed on Databricks as my team. We have a similar thing where like when we're starting something off, we're setting up jobs, we just want them to work at first, and then we want to see how big they are. There's a certain point though when you realize, hey, that job has gotten really big and it's a decent chunk of our cost, where you want to look at it and say, is it optimal? Can we tune it? And so I like your idea of starting off on something that's kind of fast. And then periodically you check in and say, whoa, this is like 10% of our costs. Do we still want to use the automation, or should we take a look at it and tune it? And is there some room for improvement? And sometimes you can say, yeah, when you invest that energy for tuning, you can actually find some savings, or you re-architect and find some savings. But it's not worth it to do that on every new thing because some features don't take off, some jobs don't grow. And so I like the idea of starting new things and then strategically investing your mental resources and optimizing the things that have the most juice for the squeeze.
Really, when you're working with anything that is managing infrastructure in different levels, whether it's the cloud, whether it's specifically Databricks or Snowflake, whatever it is, you want your people to be working on delivering actual business value, which for most people that are leveraging this type of stacks, it's going to be actually working with data itself and not having to deal with provisioning or understanding this is how we can do this more efficiently. Well, I see a lot of companies that have freakishly, and I'm sure this might get me some hate, but I know a lot of companies that have some freakishly smart people in roles that are not delivering the ROI. They're very smart. Everything that they're being asked to do, they're good at it. But the time, or as I say, the money spent to pay for their salaries, the return is not just there. They could have paid that same amount of money on actual business value development for the business.
It's kind of a trap really smart engineers can fall into, is like, engineers like problem solving, like optimizing, but you could end up getting too focused on that. And then you realize, actually, there's a great XKCD comic about this, about like, pass the salt and like, oh, I spent 3 years developing a machine that passes the salt. Like you could have just passed the salt in like 3 seconds. I think it's that kind of thing. And I think that's where having something that right off the bat can be pretty good and that is only going to get better over time is awesome. And then you can decide, hey, when is this automation needed? When is the more investment needed? And there will be a point and there will be some things, and that's when you can go ahead and do it. We do the same thing on my team. We look and say, hey, actually, this product took off. There's a lot of usage. There's a lot more data. We should go see if we can fine tune it, what we can do. And we can usually find some savings when we invest that energy, but I'm always glad we don't invest it. I've been debating how we could help customers understand this and, like actually pulling in labor cost into the equation. And it's tricky because like we can get some estimated proxies, like we can see how long you were like editing that job and we can do an estimated data engineer's kind of salary, but it's not perfect. I'd love to do some stuff like that in the future and talk to folks about it. It'd be a cool private preview. I haven't seen anyone really do that. And I think it would help really be more truth seeking and understand, wait a second, when I realized that I'm spending that much time and how valuable my time is, I would be better off spending my time doing this thing, like you said, adding business value.
I've done a lot of labor allocation stuff, so feel free to poke my brain. So I found out today that there's now going to be, for serverless, the option to optimize for cost as well as optimize for performance. And I'm very happy about that. It's something that I had actually called out a little while ago. But what I'm curious is what led to that decision, since at first it seemed like at Databricks, everyone's mind was set on no knobs, which you even touched on the knob part a little bit earlier. What led to that change?
Yeah, I think from the outside, when you hear the releases come in phases, there's a temptation to think like, oh, Databricks was performance optimized and really expensive, and now they've caved and released this. Being on the inside, I could say those have been the plans for a long time. We've talked about it, but the reality of software is you have to release something first. And our strategy, actually kind of lines up with what you've seen Tesla do with their cars. Like, pause your political feelings on Tesla and stuff for a moment. What they did that was really genius was they started with a very expensive car so they could make it work really well and sort of establish itself as a good brand and a reliable vehicle. And then they've started making it less and less expensive over time. And, they went from the more expensive, I think the Roadster started, and then it was like Y and X, and now the Model 3 is the least expensive. And who knows what the future holds, but it might be something even more broad market. In a lot of ways, that's the same journey serverless I see taking. It started off with this performance optimize, which was great for some things that could afford the extra cost to get that speed, which, like you mentioned, interactive is a great place that could use that. But then you start to compare and say, well, this job is more expensive. And you're like, yeah, it's more expensive when you're driving the high expense car. When, this new thing comes out, actually, those will be more comparable. Now, it's not going to have the same performance. There's trade-offs. When something is less expensive, usually that comes out of less features. And what we've talked about is most data workloads benefit from one of two things. They either need to be done fast, because there's some sort of like dependency or like a person sitting on a computer and their time is valuable and they're waiting for the response, or they just need to be done by X amount of time and it doesn't really matter how fast. Like, hey, we have a 24-hour SLA. As long as this piece is finished by then, the next person can pick it up. I don't care if you finish it in a minute or if you do it at hour 7. And what's really cool is if someone can communicate to us that they actually are okay with it taking longer as long as it finishes in this window, we can do our own smoothing and bin packing and figuring out how do we get those workloads. The curse of the cloud is elasticity and spikiness. When you look at like the cloud providers, they're spending billions of dollars setting up these cloud data centers. And one of the biggest things is like, how many machines do we plug in that are spinning, that are deprecating the day you plug them in? And what's the workload? And the worst thing for them is a huge workload and then a bunch of idle machines, and you're still paying for all that capacity and the machines are wearing down. What you want is smoothness. And there's various ways to do that. Reserved instances were a genius invention a decade ago. The guy that was in charge of inventing those is now CEO of AWS. So, that's a great path to be on to invent something like that. I think at Databricks, we're thinking along the same economic lines. How do we smooth out workloads so that infrastructure is balanced? And how do we find out and give customers an incentive to tell us which workloads could happen later or, we can do? And I think as we talk about something like cost optimize, that's one of those trade-offs is like, yeah, we could actually give you lower cost if you're willing to tell us that you have some flexibility on your timelines. So I'm excited. I mentioned there's this progression where some things make sense right now on serverless. Some things that are new make sense now. Some things will make sense in a little bit. And I suspect that's the next step in that journey. And there's more steps to come.